Thurl watched the recording from his command chair on the Vren flagship, arms folded, lips curled in something close to amusement. The human crew had not fired back. They had not sent a distress call. They had simply stood on the bridge watching the Vren boarding party cut through their hull and waited. They did not even try, Keswick said. Not one weapon drawn. Beside him, Commander Dasick shifted uncomfortably. He was younger than most Vren officers of his rank, and he had learned early that silence in front of Keswick was often safer than speech. But this time, he spoke anyway. Perhaps it was a trap. Keswick laughed, a short, sharp bark. A trap requires teeth, Commander. Humans have none. Ask any species in the Threshold Accord. They send diplomats who apologize before they've been insulted. They build no great fleets. They boast of nothing. A species without pride is a species without strength. He rose from his chair and walked toward the viewport where stars burned cold and distant. For 300 years we have watched them. They fight no wars. They claim no territories beyond their own small cluster. Even when the Threshold Accord grants them a seat, they say almost nothing in the chamber. I begin to wonder if humanity is even capable of anger. Dasick said nothing. He had read the reports too. The same reports Keswick had read 100 times. Humanity, first contact 3 centuries ago, a species with a violent early history that had, according to the files, voluntarily restrained itself after a period of internal conflict. It was the kind of detail buried in a footnote, the sort of thing nobody thought to question. Dasick had never questioned it either. Until now, watching the human crew stand motionless as Vren soldiers dragged them into custody, something about their stillness unsettled him. It was not the stillness of fear. It was the stillness of people who had decided, long before this moment, exactly how they would respond. Across the galaxy, in a chamber of glass and quiet light, Ambassador Elena Voss listened to the report of the Meridian's rest with an expression that did not change. "Casualties?" she asked. "None reported dead," said her aide, a young man named Priest. 12 crew taken into Vren custody. The ship itself was seized under a fabricated smuggling charge. Elena nodded once. She was in her 50s, silver threading through dark hair, and she had the kind of stillness that made people in a room speak more carefully. She had been humanity's senior ambassador to the Threshold Accord for 11 years. In that time, she had never raised her voice in the chamber, not once. "Log it," she said. "No public statement, no protest filed." Priest hesitated. "Ambassador, this is the 4th incident this year. The Vren are testing us. If we don't respond—" "We are responding," Elena said quietly. "Just not the way they expect." She turned to the window of her office, which looked out not on stars, but on the quiet green hills of the diplomatic compound on Earth. It was early morning there. Birds moved across a pale sky. It was, she thought, a strange kind of peace to hold in one hand while holding the reports of stolen ships in the other. Priest lingered at the door. "The Vren overlord called us cowards in an open accord session last week. It's on record now. Every species in the chamber heard it." "I know," Elena said. "I was there, and you said nothing." "I said nothing," she agreed, "because there was nothing to say yet." Priest didn't understand. She could see it in his face, the same confusion she'd seen in 100 young diplomats over the years, the same question they never quite dared ask directly. Why do we let them do this to us? She did not answer it. Not because she didn't have an answer, but because the answer belonged to a history that most people alive had not lived through, and because some truths were dangerous even inside the safety of her own office. 3 weeks passed. The Vren dominion grew bolder. It began with border skirmishes, ships accidentally crossing into human-claimed space, always retreating before real conflict, always followed by a mocking transmission from some Vren officer laughing at the lack of response. Then came a formal accusation before the Threshold Accord Council, Keswick Thurl himself standing at the center of the Great Chamber, addressing the assembled species of a dozen empires. "The humans hide behind silence because they have nothing else," he declared, his voice amplified through the chamber's great resonant dome. They call it peace. I call it fear. A species that will not defend even its own trade vessels does not deserve the protections of this accord. He turned, slowly, deliberately, to where Elena Voss sat among the human delegation. Tell us, Ambassador. Tell this chamber why your people never fight back. The chamber fell silent. 100 alien eyes of every shape and color turned toward her. Elena rose. She did not rush. She smoothed the front of her coat, and when she spoke, her voice was calm, almost gentle, carrying easily to the farthest seats without need of amplification. We have not needed to, she said. A ripple of laughter, mocking, from the Vren delegation. Keswick smiled. A convenient answer, he said, for a species with nothing to defend itself with. Perhaps, Elena said, or perhaps it is simply not yet the time. She sat back down. The chamber murmured, uncertain what to make of an answer that was neither denial nor defiance. Keswick, unsatisfied, ended the session with a dismissive wave, already speaking to his aides about the next stage of his plan. Plans he had no intention of sharing with the Accord. That night, in a private communication chamber aboard his flagship, Keswick outlined his true intention to his inner circle. The humans hold a colony world at the edge of their space, verdant, resource-rich, poorly defended by any measure we can detect. If we take it and they do nothing, the Accord will see once and for all what humanity truly is. If they resist, he smiled thinly, then we will have the justification we need for a wider campaign. Either outcome serves us. Dasik, seated at the edge of the circle, felt a cold unease settle in his chest. And if there is something we have not detected? Keswick waved the concern away. There is nothing to detect, Commander. We have watched them for 3 centuries. A silent species is a silent species. There is no hidden fire beneath ash that has never once burned. 3 days later, the Vren invasion fleet dropped out of transit space above the human colony of Meridian Ascension. 40 warships arranged in a formation meant to project overwhelming, undeniable force. Keswick stood on his bridge watching the planet turn beneath them, a green and blue world with no visible defense grid, no warships in orbit, nothing but scattered civilian traffic and a scattering of quiet settlements below. Signal the surface, Keswick ordered. Announce our terms, full surrender, or we begin bombardment in 1 hour. The communications officer worked at her console, then looked up, confused. Overlord. There is no response. Not silence. No signal at all. Every channel, planetary, orbital, deep space has gone completely dark. All of them. At once. Keswick frowned and stepped closer to the viewport, studying the planet, the empty space around it, the sudden and total absence of any human presence at all, as if an entire colony had simply vanished in the space of a breath. Then, on the long-range sensor array, something flickered into existence at the very edge of detection range. Not a ship, not a station. Something the sensors could not classify at all, its shape shifting and uncertain, as though it did not want to be seen, and it was moving, slowly, deliberately toward the Vren fleet. Keswick's smile faded for the first time in years. Identify that contact, he said. Now. No one answered. On every bridge across the invasion fleet, alarms began, one by one, to fail. The first warship died in silence, the same way the trade ship had. One moment, the Vren cruiser Talon of Kes held its position in the invasion formation, shields at full strength, weapons ready. The next moment, its reactor core folded in on itself, and the ship simply ceased to be a ship, breaking apart into a slow, drifting cloud of metal and frozen air. No missile trail, no weapons discharge, no warning at all. On the flagship bridge, Keswick Thurl stared at the empty space where the Talon of Kes had been, and for the first time in years, he felt something he did not have a word for in his own language, something close to fear, though he would never call it that. Report, he snapped. What hit us? Nothing, Overlord, the tactical officer said, voice cracking. No weapons fire detected, no energy signature. The ship simply failed. A second cruiser lost power a heartbeat later, drifting dark and silent among the stars. Then a third, its hull cracking open like an egg, venting atmosphere and bodies into the void. The Vren fleet, 40 ships strong, began to scatter in confusion, officers shouting contradictory orders, sensors flooding with contacts that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Commander Dasik gripped the edge of his console, watching the chaos unfold on the secondary bridge of the escort vessel Hollow Reach. He had fought in 3 border conflicts before this one. He knew the sound of battle, the particular rhythm of fear and adrenaline that moved through a crew under fire. This was different. This was the sound of a crew who did not understand what was killing them, and that made it far worse. "Get me a channel to the flagship," he ordered. Static answered him. Then, faintly, a voice that was not Vren at all, calm and precise, speaking in accented but perfectly understandable Vrenic, cutting through every channel on every ship in the fleet at once. "This fleet has entered a system under human administration without consent," the voice said. "You have 30 seconds to withdraw." Dasik felt the words settle over the bridge like a physical weight. Around him, junior officers exchanged terrified glances. 30 seconds. Not a threat. A countdown, delivered the way one might read a weather report. On the flagship, Keswick slammed his fist against the console. "Ignore it. This is a bluff, nothing more. Some trick of technology to frighten us into retreat. We hold position." The 30 seconds passed. 4 more ships died in the time it took Keswick to draw a single breath. By the time the Vren fleet broke and fled into transit space, they had lost 11 warships and nearly 2,000 crew, and not one human vessel had ever been seen. Not one weapon discharge ever detected on any sensor log. Whatever had destroyed them had done so from a distance, with a precision that suggested not just superior weapons, but perfect, effortless knowledge of exactly where to strike. Aboard a vessel that existed on no Vren star chart, hidden in the outer dark beyond Meridian Ascension, Colonel Marcus Reyes watched the retreating Vren fleet on his own display and allowed himself exactly one breath of relief before turning back to his crew. "Casualties on our side?" he asked. "None, sir," his tactical officer replied. "Colony evacuation completed 40 minutes before the Vren arrival. Every civilian is safe in the deep shelters. They never knew the fleet was even in the system." Reyes nodded, though his jaw stayed tight. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 40s, with the kind of quiet intensity that made rooms go still when he entered them. He had spent 20 years in a division of the human fleet that did not officially exist, training for a war he had been told, again and again, might never come. Today, it had come anyway. "They'll be back," he said. "Keswick isn't the kind of man who learns from one lesson." "Understood, sir." "Orders?" Reyes studied the star map, the quiet arc of human space bordering the vast sprawling territory of the Vren Dominion. "Full stealth protocols remain active. No pursuit. We let them run home and lick their wounds. For now, that's all we do." "For now," his officer repeated, an edge of doubt in her voice. "Sir, with respect, we could have ended that fleet completely. Why let any of them escape?" Reyes was quiet for a long moment. "Because Elena Voss asked us not to, and because there's a difference between winning a fight and finishing a war." He turned away from the display. "Keswick needs to go home and tell his people what happened here. That's more valuable to us than 11 more wrecks." Light years away, in the smoking ruin of what remained of Keswick's confidence, Commander Dasik sat alone in the officers' quarters of the Hollow Reach, staring at a data slate in his hands. It was a routine historical file, the kind every Vren officer had access to, a summary of past conflicts and diplomatic incidents across 3 centuries of contact with lesser species. He had pulled it up looking for any past record of human military capability, anything that might explain what he had just witnessed. Instead, he found a gap. There was a file reference numbered and cross-indexed, dated nearly 40 years before his own birth, labeled only as Incident 7 Ashfall, and beneath it, a single line of text. Access restricted by Central Command Directive. All associated records sealed. Everything else about the incident, the details, the participants, the outcome had been removed. Not classified, removed, the way a name is scratched out of a family record, as though someone had wanted it to look as if the file had never existed at all. Dasick sat with that for a long time before he brought the file to Keswick personally, hoping, perhaps foolishly, that his commander might have an explanation. He found Keswick in his private chamber, still in his battle uniform, staring out at the stars with an expression Dasick had never seen on him before, something brittle beneath the usual arrogance. "Overlord," Dasick said carefully, "I found something in the historical archive. A sealed record. Incident 7 Ashfall. It's dated during the early years of Vren contact with humanity. I thought you should see it." Keswick turned. For a moment something flickered across his face, recognition, or perhaps something closer to dread, gone so quickly Dasick almost doubted he'd seen it at all. "Where did you find this?" "Central Archive, sir. It was cross-referenced under the human incident logs. I was looking for anything that might explain what happened today." Keswick took the data slate from him, studied it in silence, and then, without a word, entered a command that wiped the file from the device entirely. "There is nothing there worth your attention, Commander," he said, his voice flat, final. "Old records, old mistakes, sealed for good reason. You will forget you ever saw it. Sir, if there is something in our own history that explains what we saw today. That is an order, Commander." Keswick's voice cracked like a whip. "Forget it." Dasick stood at attention, said nothing further, and left the chamber with his heart pounding. He had followed Keswick Thurall into 3 campaigns without question. He had believed, as most Vren officers believed, that theirs was the superior path, the destined rule of a superior species over lesser ones too weak to claim their own place in the galaxy. But he had seen the fear in Keswick's eyes when he read that file. And he had seen, only hours before, an entire fleet of Vren warships die, without ever seeing what killed them. Whatever Incident 7 Ashfall had been, it was not old history. It was a warning, buried and silenced, and Dasick intended to find out why. That night, as he lay awake in his quarters, his personal terminal chimed with an incoming transmission, routed through channels so heavily encrypted his system took nearly a full minute to even confirm it was real. When the message finally opened, there was no video, no voice, just text, 3 lines long, sent from an origin point his systems could not trace at all. "You are asking the right question, Commander Dasick. Incident 7 Ashfall was not a defeat. It was a mercy. If you want the truth, you will have to earn it." 40 years earlier, a younger Elena Voss had learned what it meant to lose everything, and the lesson had never left her. She was 19 when the sirens first sounded over the colony of New Providence, back when humanity's outer settlements were little more than scattered mining stations and research outposts, undefended and unprepared for the kind of violence that fell out of the sky that day. She remembered the sound most of all, not screaming, but a strange, terrible quiet, the kind that comes when a whole community understands all at once that nothing they do will be enough. She did not know then who had attacked them or why. She only knew that by the time it ended, 3 days later, New Providence was a graveyard, and the survivors who crawled out of the ruins carried something with them that no medicine could heal. Decades later, sitting in her office on Earth, Elena Voss closed her eyes against the memory and opened them again on the present, on the data slate in front of her showing Colonel Reyes's report from Meridian Ascension. 11 Vren warships destroyed, 0 human casualties. The invasion repelled before it truly began. It should have felt like victory. It felt instead like the beginning of something she had spent her entire adult life trying to prevent. "You wanted to see me, Ambassador." Marcus Reyes stood in the doorway of her office, still in his field uniform, dust from the evacuation shelters not yet brushed from his shoulders. He looked older than he had the last time she'd seen him, though it had only been 6 months. War did that to people, even when it hadn't fully started yet. "Sit down, Marcus," Elena said. He sat. For a while neither of them spoke. "You told your crew not to pursue the retreating fleet," Elena said finally. "I followed the protocol. Your protocol." "I know. Thank you. She turned her chair slightly, looking out at the quiet hills beyond her window. But I need to know if you agree with it. Truly agree, not just follow orders. Reyes was quiet for a long moment. I lost people I love once, to an enemy who never gave us the chance to prove ourselves before they came for us. So no, Ambassador, some part of me does not agree. Some part of me wants to end every Vren ship that comes near our space before they get the chance to try what was done to us before. And the rest of you? The rest of me remembers why we chose silence in the first place. He met her eyes. You were there. New Providence. You know better than anyone why we can't let history repeat itself, not even against people like Keswick Thurl. Elena nodded slowly. She reached into her desk and withdrew an old data cylinder, physical rather than digital, the kind of relic that predated most modern encryption by decades. She turned it over in her hands. Do you know why we never told the Threshold Accord the full truth about New Providence? She asked. Because knowing what really happened there would have started a war we weren't ready to fight. Partly, Elena said, but also because the ones responsible were never fully identified. We know it wasn't the Vren, not directly, but we've always suspected. Connections. Old alliances, old debts, things buried deep enough that even our own intelligence couldn't fully untangle them. For 40 years, we've watched and waited and built, quietly, preparing for a day we hoped would never come. And now it's come. Now it's come, she agreed. And I am afraid, Marcus, that Keswick Thurl's arrogance is about to drag old ghosts back into the light, ghosts that neither of us fully understands yet. Reyes leaned forward. Then let's finish this before it gets the chance. It is not that simple, Elena said. If we strike first, if we strike hard, the galaxy will remember only the strength, not the reason. We will become, in their eyes, exactly what Keswick claims we already are. A hidden threat, a species that hides its violence behind pretend weakness. We cannot let that happen. When the truth comes out, and it will, humanity must be remembered as the ones who endured, not the ones who struck first. So we wait. We wait, Elena said, until they leave us no other choice. And when that day comes, the whole galaxy will need to see exactly why we waited so long. 3 days later, that choice was taken from them both. Keswick Thurl, humiliated before the Vren High Council by the loss of 11 warships and desperate to reclaim the narrative of Vren supremacy, ordered a second fleet gathered, 3 times the size of the first, and set his sights not on Meridian Ascension again, but on Kepler's Hollow, a smaller, older human colony with barely a fraction of the defenses. They will not expect us so soon, Keswick told his assembled officers. And this time, there will be no evacuation, no warning. We strike before they can hide behind their tricks again. Dasik, standing at the edge of the briefing room, felt the words settle into his chest like stones. He had spent the last 3 days trying, and failing, to trace the source of the anonymous message he'd received, the one that named Incident 7 Ashfall a mercy rather than a defeat. Every path he followed led to dead ends, encrypted beyond his clearance, protected by systems that seemed to anticipate his every attempt before he made it. He had almost convinced himself the message meant nothing, some human trick meant to sow doubt in Vren ranks. Almost. Commander Dasik, Keswick said, snapping him back to attention. You will lead the vanguard. Given your concerns about the last engagement, I want you close enough to see, with your own eyes, that humanity has no answer for overwhelming force. Dasik bowed his head in acknowledgement, though something cold moved through him at the words. He had seen, at Meridian Ascension, what happened to ships that believed overwhelming force was enough. The Second Fleet departed 2 days later, 60 warships strong, moving through transit space toward Kepler's Hollow, with a speed and secrecy meant to guarantee surprise. Keswick watched the star charts update as they approached, confident that this time there would be no evacuation, no warning voice cutting through his channels, no vanishing colony. He was wrong on every count. As the fleet dropped out of transit above Kepler's Hollow, the tactical display flooded with contacts, not human ships, not the strange, unclassifiable presence they'd encountered before, but something else entirely. the twisted, drifting wreckage of an enormous alien battle fleet. Dozens of vessels torn apart and scattered across the system like broken toys, their hulls scorched by weapons fire unlike anything in the Vren database. The wreckage was old, weathered by years of exposure to vacuum, and yet, somehow, none of Vren intelligence had ever recorded its existence. "Identify that wreckage," Keswick ordered, his voice tight. The tactical officer worked in frantic silence for nearly a full minute before answering. "Overlord. Hull markings do not match any species cataloged in the Threshold Accord database. Weapon signatures are unknown. Estimated age of destruction, between 30 and 40 years. Dasik, watching from the Vanguard cruiser, felt the pieces shift into place with sickening clarity. 30 to 40 years. The same span of time since Incident 7 Ashfall had been sealed away in the Vren archives. Whatever had happened to humanity all those years ago, whatever mercy or defeat had been buried in that redacted file, it had left this. An entire fleet, larger than the one Keswick now commanded, reduced to drifting wreckage in a system humanity had never bothered to defend, because whatever came for them once had already been dealt with, silently, completely, and without a single word ever reaching the wider galaxy. Keswick stared at the wreckage on his display, his confidence, for the first time since the campaign began, visibly shaken. "Overlord," Dasik said quietly, "I don't think this is a trap. I think this is a warning." Before Keswick could answer, every channel on the fleet's communications array lit up at once, not with a threat, not with a countdown, but with a single image, transmitted without explanation. A photograph of the drifting wreckage, time-stamped decades old, with one line of text beneath it, in perfect Vrenic script. "Some of you should have remembered this before you came here." Fear, Keswick Thural had learned long ago, could be turned into a weapon, if a commander was ruthless enough to use it before it turned on him instead. He stood on his bridge, staring at the ancient wreckage scattered across the Kepler's hollow system, at the message burning on every screen of his fleet, and felt the eyes of his own officers on him, waiting to see whether their overlord would break or hold. He could not afford to hesitate. Hesitation in front of 60 ships and thousands of watching crew would be its own kind of death. "It is a bluff," he announced, louder than necessary. "A recording, a trick of old wreckage repurposed to frighten children. We came here for a colony, and a colony we will take." Dasik, watching from the Vanguard cruiser, felt something twist in his stomach. He had seen the fear in Keswick's eyes just moments before the declaration. He recognized denial when he heard it, especially from a man who had built his entire career on refusing to admit weakness, even to himself. "Overlord," Dasik said carefully over the comm, "may I suggest a full withdrawal until we understand what we are dealing with?" "You may not," Keswick snapped. "Begin the bombardment." Below them, Kepler's hollow turned slowly in the dark. A small colony of perhaps 40,000 people, farmers and engineers and teachers, families who had built their lives on the promise that humanity's quiet diplomacy would keep them safe. There had been no time to evacuate. No warning voice had cut through Vren channels this time. No vanishing colony. No strange presence at the edge of sensors. Whatever force had protected Meridian ascension, it was not here. The bombardment began at Keswick's order, and it did not stop for 6 hours. Colonel Marcus Reyes received the first fragmented distress signal from Kepler's hollow 40 minutes into the attack, relayed through a chain of emergency beacons that should never have needed to activate. He read the report standing in the command center of his hidden fleet, and something in his chest went very still, the particular stillness of a man forcing himself not to feel anything yet, because feeling anything yet would mean he could not do his job. "Casualties," he said, though he already knew somehow that the number would be one he could not unhear. "Estimated 6,000 dead in the first hour alone, sir," his tactical officer said, her voice shaking. "The colony had no orbital defense. They're bombarding population centers directly. It's not military, it's—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Reyes closed his eyes. Among the names flooding in from the colony's emergency registry, one stopped his breath entirely. His sister's name, Sarah Reyes, listed among residents of Kepler's Hollow's Eastern District. The district struck first. The district that had, according to the last transmission before the beacon there went silent, ceased to exist. He did not speak for nearly a full minute. When he opened his eyes again, something in them had changed, something that would not change back. "Get me Ambassador Voss," he said. Now. Elena Voss received the call in her office on Earth, and she listened to Marcus Reyes deliver the casualty report in a voice stripped of every ounce of the calm control she had always known in him. She listened to him say his sister's name. She listened to the silence after it, the silence of a man who had spent his entire life preparing for exactly this moment, and discovering, now that it had arrived, that no amount of preparation made it bearable. "Marcus," she said quietly, "I am so sorry." "Don't," he said. "Don't be sorry. Authorize the protocol." Elena closed her eyes. She knew which protocol he meant. It was a name that existed only in the most classified layers of human military planning, a plan built across 40 years by people who had hoped, every single day, that it would never need to be used. Protocol Silence Breaker, the end of restraint. "Marcus, once we begin this, there is no controlled version of what comes next. You understand that? I understand that my sister is dead because we let a monster believe restraint meant weakness," Reyes said, his voice breaking for just a moment, before hardening again. "I understand that 6,000 people are dead because we were still deciding whether we'd earned the right to defend them. I understand more than you know, Ambassador." Elena was quiet for a long moment. The weight of 40 years of careful, patient strategy balanced against the raw grief in the voice of a man she had trusted with more than she trusted almost anyone alive. "I will bring it to the council within the hour," she said finally. "But Marcus, listen to me. When we do this, we do it exactly as it was designed. Precision. Restraint where restraint is possible. We do not become what we're fighting. Do you understand me?" "I understand," Reyes said. "I just don't know if I can promise it." "You will," Elena said, "because that promise is the only thing that separates what we're about to do from what Keswick Thurl just did to your sister's home." The council authorized Protocol Silence Breaker 40 minutes later, unanimous, without debate, the kind of vote that comes only when grief has already made the argument no politician could. Aboard the Hollow Reach, Commander Dasick watched the bombardment continue below, watched fires bloom across the surface of Kepler's Hollow, with a horror he could no longer contain behind military discipline. He had followed Keswick Thurl through 3 campaigns believing, as most Vren believed, that theirs was a superior path, a destined rule over lesser species, too weak to claim the stars for themselves. He did not believe that anymore. He had not believed it if he was honest with himself, since the moment he'd read the words, Incident 7. Ashfall was not a defeat, it was a mercy, and he believed it even less now, watching an unarmed civilian colony burn beneath his own fleet's guns. His terminal chimed. The same encrypted channel as before, the same impossible-to-trace origin point. "You have seen enough now, Commander Dasick. What happens next cannot be stopped by anyone, not even us. But you can choose which side of it you stand on. The choice is yours. It always was." Dasick stared at the message for a long time, the bombardment continuing below him, the screams of a dying colony filling every channel his crew had not yet learned to mute. Then, without a word to anyone, he began quietly rerouting a private data packet. Everything he had gathered about Incident 7 Ashfall, about Keswick's fleet movements, about the sealed archives his commander had ordered him to forget, toward the same untraceable channel that had first reached out to him. He did not know yet exactly what he was choosing. He knew only that he could no longer stand beside a man who ordered the deaths of children and called it strategy. Above Kepler's Hollow, as the 6th hour of bombardment began, every screen across Keswick's fleet lit up at once, not with wreckage this time, not with warnings, with Elena Voss's face, calm, composed, and utterly without mercy. "You were warned by our silence," she said, her voice carrying through every ship in the Vren fleet, translated instantly into perfect Vrenic. "You mistook it for weakness. Now you will understand why we never needed to speak. The transmission ended. For 3 full seconds nothing happened, and Keswick allowed himself to believe one final time that it had been nothing more than words. Then every sensor array across his fleet and across every Vren system within a dozen light years went completely, simultaneously dark. Blindness, Keswick Thurl discovered, was worse than death because death was at least an ending. For 3 full minutes his entire fleet drifted in total sensor darkness above the burning ruins of Kepler's Hollow, unable to see beyond the hulls of their own ships, unable to raise a single functioning channel to any vessel around them. Officers shouted into dead comm systems. Weapons crews stood useless at targeting stations with nothing to target, and in that darkness, humanity's true fleet arrived. Not with the fury of vengeance, but with the terrible calm of a plan that had been rehearsed for 40 years. When the sensors returned, all at once, without warning, Keswick's bridge crew saw human warships surrounding them on every side, sleek and silent, weapons already locked, and not a single shot had yet been fired. "Overlord," his tactical officer said, voice shaking. "We are completely surrounded. Weapons fire will be met with immediate total retaliation. This is not a threat. It is a statement of fact from their fleet computer." Keswick stared at the human ships, 60 of them, precisely matching his own fleet's numbers, arranged with a symmetry that felt less like military formation and more like a closing hand. He thought for one bitter moment of every report he had read across 3 centuries describing humanity as passive, as unremarkable, as a species incapable of true ambition. He understood now, far too late, that those reports had not been describing humanity's weakness at all. They had been describing humanity's patience. "Fire," Keswick said. "Fire everything. We will not be humiliated by—" The order never finished. Every weapons system across his fleet failed simultaneously, disabled by a cascading override that human intelligence had spent decades embedding in the very architecture of Vren shipboard technology. Technology the Dominion had, ironically, purchased in bulk from human trade contracts over the years, never once suspecting the quiet, dormant code layered beneath its surface. Across the wider Dominion, the same silence fell on system after system. Human forces, invisible for so long that most Vren citizens had never truly believed in their existence at all, appeared with devastating precision at shipyards, command stations, and border fortresses, disabling rather than destroying wherever possible, striking only military targets, sparing civilian infrastructure with a discipline that stood in stark, deliberate contrast to what Keswick had done at Kepler's Hollow. The galaxy watched, through 1,000 independent news channels and observer drones belonging to a dozen different species, as the empire that had called humanity cowards was dismantled in a matter of days, not through overwhelming slaughter, but through overwhelming precision, an entire military structure unraveling as though someone had finally decided to pull a single, carefully chosen thread. Commander Dasick, aboard the Hollow Reach, watched his own weapon systems fail along with everyone else's, and felt something that was not fear at all, but something closer to relief. He had already sent everything he knew to the Human Intelligence Channel days before. Now, as human boarding craft approached his ship without resistance, he gave the order himself, before any of his junior officers could act rashly. "Stand down," he said. "All weapons, all defenses. We are not fighting today." His first officer stared at him in disbelief. "Commander, that is—" "An order," Dasick said. "One I will answer for personally, to whoever asks." When the human boarding party entered the bridge of the Hollow Reach, led by a woman who introduced herself simply as Captain Okoye, Dasick was waiting for them, unarmed, standing at what he hoped would be read as attention rather than surrender. "Commander Dasick," Okoye said, studying him carefully, "we've read your transmissions, the historical records, the fleet movements. You've given us more in 3 days than 3 centuries of espionage ever managed." "I did what I believed was right," Dasick said. "I would like to know if you are willing to tell me what Incident 7 Ashfall truly was. I have been chasing that answer since before this war began." Okoye's expression shifted, something careful entering her eyes. That's not my answer to give, Commander. But I think before this is over you'll have it. Word of the Dominion's collapse reached the Vren High Council within days, and with it came Dasik's testimony, transmitted openly, without human interference, describing in careful detail the atrocity at Kepler's Hollow, Keswick's suppression of the Incident 7 Ashfall archive, and the desperate, unauthorized bombardment of a civilian colony that had triggered humanity's response in the first place. The Council, already reeling from the loss of 60% of their active battle fleet in less than a week, moved swiftly to distance themselves from their overlord, stripping Keswick of command and authority, even as human forces continued their methodical dismantling of Dominion military infrastructure. Keswick, humiliated and cornered, did not accept the judgment of his own council. Instead, under cover of the chaos, he fled with a small, loyal contingent toward the Dominion's capital world, where, buried deep beneath the ancient citadel of Vren Prime, lay a weapon so old and so dangerous that even the Council itself had forgotten it still existed, sealed away generations before under the same shadow of secrecy that had swallowed Incident 7 Ashfall. Colonel Marcus Reyes received the intelligence report on Keswick's flight while standing in the makeshift memorial his crew had built for the dead of Kepler's Hollow, a simple wall of names, growing daily as identification efforts continued. His sister's name was near the top, and he had not yet found the strength to look at it directly for longer than a few seconds at a time. "He's running for Vren Prime," his tactical officer reported. "Command believes he intends to access something called the Ashfall Cradle. We don't have full records on it, sir. It's buried under multiple layers of Vren classification, older than anything else in their archive." Reyes turned from the memorial wall, something hard and focused settling over the grief in his eyes. "Ashfall," he repeated. "Same name as the incident?" "Yes, sir. Command believes it may be connected to whatever happened 40 years ago, possibly the source of the technology used at New Providence." Reyes felt a chill move through him that had nothing to do with the ship's climate control. He had grown up hearing whispered fragments of New Providence, the way children hear ghost stories, never the full truth, only the shape of a horror too large to speak of directly. He had never once considered that the shape of that horror might still exist, waiting, buried at the heart of the very empire his people were now dismantling. "Assemble a strike team," he said. "I'm leading it personally. Sir, with respect, Command hasn't authorized a ground assault on Vren Prime itself. The political risk. Keswick Thurl murdered 6,000 people, including my sister, and he is running toward something that might be tied to the worst day in human history," Reyes said, his voice quiet, final. "I am not asking Command's permission. I am informing you of my intentions. Assemble the team." 2 days later, Reyes led a small human strike force through the ruined outer defenses of Vren Prime, Dasik at his side as guide, the Vren commander having volunteered for the mission the moment he learned its purpose. They moved through corridors that had not seen war in 3 centuries, past ancient Vren architecture untouched by the chaos above, descending deeper and deeper beneath the capital's central citadel, toward a sealed vault door, older than either of their species' current governments. Dasik studied the ancient seals on the door, his expression darkening. "These markings. I have never seen this style of Vren script. This predates even our oldest historical archives." Reyes ran a hand along the door's cold surface, something cold and certain settling in his chest. "It's not Vren." "What do you mean?" Reyes pointed to a small weathered symbol near the base of the door, half hidden beneath centuries of dust. A symbol he recognized instantly, because he had seen it once before, carved into a memorial stone at New Providence, marking the exact spot where the first attack had begun. It was a human symbol, old, forgotten, but unmistakably human. Behind them, the vault door began, slowly, to open on its own, ancient machinery grinding to life for the first time in decades as though it had been waiting patiently for exactly this moment. "Reyes," Dasik said quietly, "whatever this weapon is, I do not think it was ever truly Vren technology at all." The door finished opening, revealing a chamber of impossible scale, and standing at its center, waiting, was Keswick Thural, his hand resting on a console humming with power older than either of their empires. And behind him, rising from the darkness, the unmistakable silhouette of a weapon built not by alien hands but by humanity's own, decades ago, and never, ever meant to be found again. "You should not have come this far, Colonel Reyes." Keswick Thurl did not turn from the console. His voice, for the first time since the war began, carried no arrogance at all, only exhaustion and something close to despair. Behind him, the weapon rose out of the darkness like the skeleton of some enormous sleeping animal, its surface etched with human alloy markings, its architecture unmistakably, impossibly familiar. "What is this?" Reyes asked, though some part of him already had known since he saw the symbol on the vault door, the same symbol carved into the memorial stone at New Providence. "The truth," Keswick said, finally turning to face him. "The truth my own government buried so deep even I was not permitted the full record, only enough to know it existed, and enough fear to never ask further questions. Do you know what Incident 7 Ashfall truly was, Colonel? I did not until 3 days ago, when your Commander Dasek's leaked files forced my own council to finally show me the archive they had hidden from me my entire career." Dasek stepped forward, his expression tight. "Tell him, Keswick. Tell him what you found if you have any honor left at all." Keswick's laugh was hollow. "Honor, yes. Let me tell you about honor." He gestured to the weapon behind him. 40 years ago, a faction within our own dominion, one that no longer officially exists, though its methods clearly still do, believed humanity represented a threat too dangerous to allow to grow unchecked. Your species was young then, scattered, undefended. They believed, in their arrogance, that a controlled strike, disguised as an act of unknown raiders, could cripple your development before you ever became strong enough to challenge Vren dominance. Reyes felt something cold settle into his chest. New Providence. New Providence, Keswick confirmed, and Ashfall was the name of the operation, and the weapon used to carry it out. Stolen, we now believe, from an even earlier human colony that faction had already destroyed decades before that, harvesting your own technology to use against you, disguising every trace of Vren involvement so completely that even your own intelligence never fully connected the wreckage to us. Dasek's face had gone pale. This is why the archive was sealed. Not to hide a defeat, to hide a crime. Yes, Keswick said, and when the faction responsible finally overreached, attacking a fully defended human world decades later, and losing their entire fleet in the process, the wreckage you found at Kepler's Hollow, my government did not confess. They erased everything. They buried the shame so completely that men like me grew up believing humanity was simply weak, simply passive, never questioning why a species with no obvious military strength was somehow never attacked again after that final defeat. His voice cracked. We built 3 centuries of contempt on top of a lie we told ourselves to avoid facing what we had done. The chamber fell silent. Reyes stared at the ancient weapon, humanity's own stolen technology, twisted and repurposed to nearly end them, and felt grief and fury tangled together in his chest until he could barely tell them apart. "And now?" he asked. "What is this, Keswick? Why bring me here?" Keswick's hand moved back to the console. "Because I am not ready to face what comes after this war. My council has already condemned me. My empire is already broken. This weapon still holds enough power to level a planet, Colonel. I intend to make sure that whatever remains of the Vren Dominion is not remembered as the empire that lost to humanity. It will be remembered as the empire that refused to kneel." "You'll kill millions of your own people," Dasek said, horrified. "For pride." "For legacy," Keswick corrected, and activated the console. The weapon began to hum, ancient systems groaning to life, power building toward something neither Reyes nor Dasek fully understood, but which both recognized instinctively as catastrophic. Reyes moved first, closing the distance to Keswick before the Vren overlord could react, driving him back from the console with a strength born of 40 years of training and days of unbearable grief. Keswick fought back with the desperation of a man who had nothing left to lose, and for a long, brutal moment the two of them struggled at the edge of a weapon capable of ending a world. "Dasik!" Reyes shouted. "The console, can you shut it down?" Dasik was already moving, hands flying across unfamiliar controls, human and Vren systems tangled together in configurations he had never trained for. "I don't know this architecture, Reyes. I need more time." "We don't have time." Keswick broke free of Reyes's grip and lunged back toward the console. And in that final, desperate moment, Reyes had a choice. The same choice humanity had made, quietly, over and over, for 40 years. He could end this here, permanently, the way grief and rage both screamed at him to do. Or he could choose, one more time, the harder path. He tackled Keswick away from the console, pinning him to the ground, and instead of the killing blow every instinct demanded, he simply held him there, immovable, until Dasik's hands finally found the right sequence and the weapon's terrible hum began, slowly, to fade. "It's powering down," Dasik said, breathless. "Reyes, it's stopping." Keswick, pinned beneath Reyes, stared up at him with something between hatred and confusion. "Why?" he rasped. "Why not simply kill me? I have earned it 100 times over." Reyes looked down at the man who had ordered his sister's death, who had nearly triggered a second ashfall out of nothing but wounded pride, and felt the answer rise in him from someplace deeper than anger. "Because that's exactly what you'd expect from us," Reyes said quietly. "And you were wrong about us from the very beginning." Keswick Thurl was taken into custody within the hour, to stand before both the Threshold Accord and what remained of his own Vren Council. The full truth of Incident 7. Ashfall finally released to the wider galaxy exactly as it had happened, without exaggeration, without human embellishment, simply the truth, allowed to speak for itself after 40 years of silence. The galaxy's reaction was immediate and profound. Species who had quietly dismissed humanity as passive or weak now understood, with sudden and uncomfortable clarity, that the silence had never been weakness at all. It had been patience, earned through unimaginable loss, maintained through decades of quiet preparation, and finally broken only when there was no honorable alternative left. 3 months later, Ambassador Elena Voss stood once more before the full chamber of the Threshold Accord, the same chamber where Keswick Thural had once demanded she explain humanity's cowardice. This time, every seat was filled, every species watching in a silence far different from the mocking laughter of before. "You asked us once why we never fought back," she said, her voice calm, carrying easily to the farthest corners of the great chamber. "I told you it was simply not yet the time. I understand now that the answer deserved to be more complete." She paused, and for the first time in 11 years as ambassador, something like genuine emotion moved across her composed features. "We do not fight for pride. We do not fight for territory or glory. We fight only when there is no other way left to protect what we love. And even then we try, always to remain the people we were before the fighting started. That is not weakness. It never was. It is the hardest kind of strength there is." The chamber remained silent for a long moment after she finished, and then, slowly, species after species rose from their seats, not in the mocking amusement of before, but in something that, across 100 different cultures and customs, could only be understood as respect. On Kepler's Hollow, rebuilding had already begun. Human hands alongside Vren engineers sent by a newly reformed Dominion Council, eager to make amends however it could. Marcus Reyes stood at the memorial wall bearing his sister's name, no longer alone. Commander Dasik stood beside him now, a strange and unlikely friendship forged in the wreckage of a war neither of them had wanted. "She would have liked this place," Reyes said quietly, looking out over the colony rising again from its ashes. "She always believed things could be rebuilt, even the things that seemed completely broken." "I am sorry I could not stop what happened to her," Dasik said. "I have carried that since the day the bombardment began." Reyes shook his head. "You stopped something far worse from happening after. That matters too." Dasik nodded, looking out at the same stars that had once seemed to him like a birthright waiting to be claimed. "I used to believe my people were meant to rule this galaxy. I understand now that I was simply born into a lie told by men too ashamed to admit what they had done." The truth has a way of finding its way out eventually, Rhea said, no matter how deep you bury it. That night, far above Kepler's hollow, Elena Voss stood alone on the observation deck of a quiet human vessel, watching the stars turn slowly overhead, calm and unthreatening once more. 40 years of patience had finally found its end, not in triumph but in something quieter and more lasting. Understanding, earned the hardest way possible, and a galaxy that would never again mistake humanity's silence for weakness. It had never been surrender, she thought, watching the light of 100 distant systems flicker gently against the dark. It had been patience, and patience finally had spoken.